Like, share, and subscribe to my channel as I continue to provide with trusted information for you to use to make decisions. I want to deal with an issue that a number of persons are not dealing with, and you know that I am the person that looks at issues. I want to look at mental fatigue among those who are elderly, 55 years and older. During the COVID-19 pandemic, a number of persons are not thinking of these things and saying to themselves that at least we need to examine what is going on with persons across the various age cohorts, the various age groups, and to see how they are affected by things. So I want to look at this particular age group. And of course, a substantial number of these persons are approaching retirement, and some are retired, and some are retiring. Now, mental fatigue is a psychological, biological state that is brought on by prolonged demanding cognitive work, thus cause subjective sense of exhaustion and other things. And you see it here by this author that's on your screen. Now, what we need to understand clearly that aging is a reality that we just cannot stop. And despite the fact that your mind does not necessarily think that you are getting older, aging is a reality that you have to deal with. So we need to understand. So what we want to look at now, we want to look at this mental fatigue. Having worked for so many years or having to deal with other issues, including family, what were a number of persons actually experiencing during the COVID-19 pandemic there? So we want to look at this. So we'll be looking at a model, all right, that is a compassion fatigue model that was by Figley in 1995 to look what is naturally happening in terms of people's behavior and how they deal with stress and coping with other things. We want to look at that model and use that model to do our work as it relates to the matter of those persons who are older than 55 years. And here exactly is a model. If you look at the model by Figley 2001, you realize that a number of things are brought into the whole matter of people trying to just deal with what? Fatigue, all right? And you see it here, the various components. Some of them are placed in yellow, various shades of yellow, some green, some orange, and of course, they all lead to looking at the matter relating to fatigue. All right. So the literature is actually well established there in terms of what COVID-19 brought to us. Now, apart from the fact that COVID-19 was a respiratory illness that could be transmitted from one person to the next, they call those communicable diseases, then it means that a number of persons began to fear COVID-19 because they did not know who had it. And once some person's immune system were already compromised, and therefore when they got the virus, many persons died, and persons actually saw persons dying in terms of some people die at stations in China and various places. So people were aware of it, and this was also happening in Jamaica, and therefore many persons feared the unknown in terms of COVID-19. So when the influenza vaccine was actually introduced, a number of persons actually went out there and tried to take it. A number of those who were elderly decided not to take that. And both those who took it as well as those who did not were equally concerned and fatigued by what was going on in terms of the lockdown. Many of them could not call the children. Many of them could not see their children. Many of them could not actually go out. What they had to do was to actually use their money that they had in the home to deal with whatever situation that they had. And remember clearly here that many of these elderly persons who are over 55 years are carriers of other ailments. And when I say carriers here, I do not mean to be disrespectful. I just mean have other illnesses, and some have multiple illnesses, and therefore they were dealing with all these illnesses. So this research wants to look at what is actually happening to those persons who are over 65 in terms of what was actually going on with these guys, and see if we can know more about what they were going through during the pandemic period. All right. So we design a Google form and we actually send out this information to people via their cell phone, via the internet, etc., to gather information from them. All right. We seek to interview persons from across the 14 parishes in Jamaica so as to ensure that we have a representative sample. So therefore, this work is an extensive one. Having said that, let's now look at some of the findings that we got garnered from this research. So we interviewed 1,124 individuals who are at least 55 years and older. So we looked at those persons who are approaching old age, those persons who are young old, and oldest old, and those are well defined. From 65 to 74 is considered to be the young old. From 75 to 84 are considered to be the old, and the eldest old or the oldest old are those persons who are over 85, and those persons who are approaching 55, sorry, 60, 65, those were considered to be the what? Um, those approaching old. We had marginally more number of males and females, persons were taken from all the parishes, and we see here that most of the persons that we interviewed were at the secondary level in terms of education. That's the furthest they had reached, and many of these individuals are married. And I want you to understand clearly that married does not mean that they are living with their partners. It just means that the status that they hold at the time. All right. So let's get into the issue relating to mental fatigue now. So the issue relating to fatigue. And let's look at fatigue in terms of breaking up the matter relating to fatigue. All right. So that did not feel fatigue at all. 42% of those persons who we sampled did not feel fatigue at all, which means that more of those persons who were older than 55 years old were experiencing some degree of fatigueness. In fact, we can actually give you the percent. It's actually 57.9%, almost 58% of those persons who are older than what, 55 years old, felt some level of what, fatigue during COVID-19 pandemic. All right. Now, mental fatigue now. Let's look at mental fatigue now. All right. I could not manage in the same way as usual. My ability for the sustained mental effort was not reduced, and that's 47%, which means that most of these individuals had some challenges dealing with what was happening to them during the COVID-19 pandemic. All right, let's look at another one. Mental recovery. I need to rest for less than an hour before continuing whatever I was doing. 48%, which means that more of them were having difficulty now as a result of dealing with COVID-19. They were trying now to cope and to deal with number of hours that they wanted to sleep, to recover from whatever was happening to them. They were requiring more time as a result of what was happening to them during COVID-19. So what we are saying is that a substantial number of our Jamaican elderly, and let me actually redefine the elderly here, we're talking about those who are older than 55 years old, were experiencing some degree of what? Fatigueness. They were having challenges sleeping, they were having challenges just coping with what was happening, and they were there at home trying just to what? Concentrate to deal with things. Let's look at another one. Concentration difficulties. I could not concentrate as usual. And that's 44% of them, so that they could not concentrate as usual. All right. I sometimes lost concentration, 31% of them. So that tells you what was going on with this person, with these individuals, right? Memory problems. I had no memory problem, 44%, which means 47, which means that 55.6% of persons were having memory problem during the COVID-19 pandemic. The elderly people, that shows what was going on with them. The elders were going through much mental health stressors than prior to COVID-19 pandemic. Now, slowness in terms of thinking. My thoughts were neither slow nor sluggish when it came to what work involving mental effort. 53% of them. So a substantial number of them, which was less than those persons who were what? Facing problems, had a slowness in terms of thinking. Most of them were doing pretty well in terms of their thinking ability. That wasn't the issue. It was their fatigue in terms of rest time, in terms of sleep, in terms of challenges of COVID. And I presume that would include relating to their children, relating to other persons, being able to see people physically, And of course, many of them were not accustomed to social media. So because many of them were not accustomed to social media, then they had to learn all of that. So there were a number of other things. Then on your screen here now is also a sensitivity to what? To stress. I was able to cope with stress in the same way as usual. 46% of them said they were able to cope with stress, which means that more of them were unable to cope with the stressors that were occurring, emitting, happening during the COVID-19 pandemic. So the COVID-19 pandemic was really taking a toll on those persons who are elderly. Um, there are other issues that are here in terms of sensitivity, in terms of light, sensitivity, in terms of noise. Um, we also had other issues that they were actually facing. Them actually showing you them that you can actually look at them as well to sort of see what these guys were going through. But let's look at another one. Decreased sleep at night. 50% of them did not what? Have an issue with sleep, which means that 50% of them also had a problem with what? With sleeping at night, reduced sleeping at night. The mind, they were having challenges dealing with what? Increased sleep. More of them had problems in terms of trying to what? To sleep. This was what was happening to our people. All right. If you would experience 24-hour variation, all right, let's look at this one. When do you feel at your best? And most of them said that they felt at their best during the morning. After the morning, things deteriorate and things became worse. Let's go. When do things became worse? From the evening to the night. Would explain why many of them were unable to what? To sleep. They were having challenges sleeping. So what we need to understand clearly, and looking at from the perspective of gerontology, which actually study those who are elderly, those who are aging. All right? We to understand clearly as people age, many of their friends and loved ones that they grew up with, their peers, including husbands and spouses and or spouses, would have died. So they are now trying to deal with the reality of the new situation that they're experiencing, and what they have to deal with during COVID-19 was the additional stuff in trying to actually what? Speak to people on phone, interacting with people on phone. And then the lockdown meant that a number of them had to stay home as well. Those who are not shut-ins had to stay home just to that, to survive. And that whole fear factor relating to this disease created a substantial problem for many of them to try to sleep. And this is something that we need to understand clearly, that even among those who are older, they are experiencing quite a lot, and they experienced quite a lot during the COVID-19 pandemic. What has a society done in terms of trying to help those persons who were going through all this mental challenge during COVID-19? Nothing. And we are saying we need to address this because COVID-19 was a real reality for many of those persons who are older than what? 18 years. All right? It's a reality, and I'm saying to persons that let us see how best we can help those who are older than 55 years to cope post COVID 19. They were experiencing quite a lot during COVID 19. What we need to do now is another research to ascertain what is going on with these persons who are older than what? Older than 55 years? To see currently have they adjusted post COVID 19. What we're noticing, what we found from the research is that many of those persons who are older than 55 were not dealing with COVID 19. They were having difficulty with COVID 19. Mentally, they were unable to sleep. Mentally, a number of them could not possibly, were not able to eat as they would normally eat. Were having difficulty sleeping, difficulty dealing with the nights, difficulty dealing with the evenings. And this is something we need to look at. What is their current state in Jamaica in 2025 post COVID 19? Something we need to deal with, so we need to understand, because the mind is critical to health and well being, as well as prosperity and life. What do you have to say? Like, share, and subscribe to my channel. Share this clip with someone. We want to hear people's view, particularly those persons older than 55 years old. How are you managing? How are you dealing currently? And we want to hear how you dealt with the COVID-19 pandemic as well. Were you frustrated? Were you sleeping? Were you dealing with things effectively? Did you have problems managing and dealing with staying home, the lockdown, not being able to see your children physically, not being able to see some persons physically? How were you coping? And for those persons who are younger, we also want to hear your views. What transpired for you during COVID 19?